Hello lovelies, how are you today? And welcome to my channel. My name is Sharon and I'm the sole proprietor of SAEH Body Butter. And I hope you enjoy the next video. Thank you.
Okay, I'm about to start doing a football beer mug set. So what I basically did, my first step is to spray paint the mug. And then I tape the inside of the rim so that hopefully not too much epoxy will get down in there, so you won't have too much cleanup after the fact. So you put this on the cup turner, and then you get your epoxy together. Now mine is a 1-to-1 ratio, so I have equal part A as well as equal part B, and then I'll mix them together for 5 minutes, and then the party will get started. Okay, let's get started. The epoxy has been mixed, stirred together for 5 minutes. As I said before, equal parts A, equal parts B. But that would depend on what type of epoxy that you use. So, what I like to do is smooth it on the tumbler first before I start turning it. I do much as one side as possible and then I turn it. Each person has their own way of doing it. So I'm doing 2 mugs right now. So what I'll do is put the epoxy on both mugs, and then I'll come back in and hit it with the alcohol inks. So my first part, as I said, I spray paint it first, and I usually let it dry for 24 hours, and then I come back the next day and put the epoxy and alcohol inks on it. Then I'll let that dry for 24 hours, and then the next day I'll put the decal on and then epoxy over that. And then it sits for 3 days. It has to cure for 3 days before I even give it to the customer. And make sure that you're wearing gloves, nitrile gloves, and also a respirator mask. The particular brand of epoxy that I use does have low fumes. However, I don't want to take any chances. Safety first. Okay, that one's all done. And go over to the next one. And you have to make sure that you have a sturdy turner, because these mugs that I get from the Dollar Tree are very, very heavy. They are very heavy. If you don't have a strong enough turner, your turner will be like the little engine that could. It won't give a full rotation. You want to make sure that you put enough epoxy on your mug, your tumbler, or what have you, so that it can carry the alcohol inks. And I normally put on 2 pair of gloves since I rub it in with my hands, so that when I go to the alcohol inks, I'll have on a fresh pair of gloves, because I'll just take the top layer of gloves off. So right now I'm checking to make sure that I have enough epoxy on the tumblers before I start with the alcohol ink. And I do. So I'm going to take off the top layer of gloves. And underneath now I have on a pair of clean gloves that I can work with. Because let me tell you, child, one time my gloves were so messed up, and I destroyed my heat gun because it had epoxy on it. And then when I went to work with it again, I couldn't turn the lever on. So what I was doing with the heat gun was bursting any air bubbles. And you'll have to do that a couple of times because they rise up as the epoxy sits. And basically there is no rhyme or reason how you place the alcohol inks, because of course what you see now will be totally different from when it's finished. You know, working with epoxy and alcohol inks is like a box of chocolate. You don't know what you're going to get until the finished product. But that's one thing that I love about it. It's just, to me, it's just totally mesmerizing. Totally mesmerizing. Okay, and I'll hit it again with the heat gun. Okay, I see some spots where the epoxy didn't stay, so I'll add some more epoxy. And this process right here can generally take anywhere from 30 minutes. because basically that's all the working time that I have with my particular epoxy. Some epoxies will give you an hour working time before it thickens, but mine usually is about 30 to 45 minutes. It just depending. And I'll hit it again with the heat gun. Some people use torches. You can use a blowtorch, but don't get too close to the alcohol ink because the alcohol ink is flammable. But they use the torch because it's better at popping the small air bubbles. And the heat gun pops the air bubbles as well, but it also helps the alcohol ink move. And so after I'm satisfied with how things is coming along, I'll let this spin for about 6 to 8 hours. And then I'll turn the spinner off and let it sit for 24 hours. And then I'll come back the next day and put on the decal and then apply a full coating of epoxy again. And I'll let that spin again for 6 to 8 hours and let it sit for 24 hours. So everything seems to be looking good. I'm going to get some more heat over here. See if I can get some of these swirls. See, this handle looks to be a little dry. And I like to kind of watch it to make sure that the epoxy is moving and not pooling in one area, so that you won't have a lump that you have to sand off, and then that could delay your project by another day or so. So everything seems to look good. I'll bring you up close. This is how it's working. Those splotches are turning into swirls. And that's the thing, no two cups will ever look the same. So I'll leave this to sit, like I said, let it spin for 6 to 8 hours. And then I'll come back tomorrow and add the decal. Okay, we're back at step 3. I'm apply the final coat of epoxy. I've already put on the decal. As you see, this is printable vinyl. And what I did was I sealed it with Rust-Oleum matte finish clear protective finish. So I sprayed it. I gave it one good spray after it came out of the printer, and then I sprayed it again after I put it on the mug, because oftentimes when you put the epoxy on around the seams, it'll start lifting up. So I make sure I give it a spray to help seal it on the mug, so we won't have any of that. And you see the swirls, the colors, how they swirls and waves of the alcohol ink. So that's how it does from sitting on the spinner. And like I said, you never know the outcome until it's finished, and no two mugs are ever alike. So this is the final coat of epoxy that I'll put on, and I'll let it spin for about 6 to 8 hours, and then let it dry for a complete 24 hours, and then it has to cure for 3 days before it's ready to give to your customer. So let's get started. So the hardest part of this is waiting for the epoxy to cure. That's the hardest part. But it's relatively easy. And again, you make sure you have your gloves on, and you make sure you have your mask on. It looks like that one's fully covered, and I'll go over to the other one. Okay. So it looks like I have a full coverage of epoxy on both of the mugs. So I'll hit it with the heat gun to pop any air bubbles. Looks like I see a couple of spots that needs a little bit more of epoxy. That one looks good, but I think I noticed on this one, I just do better with my hands. And so that's basically it. Both tumblers, mugs are fully covered with epoxy. The air bubbles have been popped. And so like I said, it'll sit on the turner for about 6 to 8 hours. It'll spin on the turner for 6 to 8 hours. And then it'll sit for an entirety of 24 hours to fully dry. And then I'll take it off the tumbler and clean up the inside of the glass if any epoxy got on the inside. And then I'll let it sit for an additional 2 days. Alrighty, I'm getting ready to make the coasters that go with it. So stay tuned while I get that set up. Okay, so we're on to the coaster. So I've put some epoxy on top, and I'll just spread it to evenly coat the top of the coaster. And around the sides. And I'll let that sit for a minute, and then I'm going to hit it with the heat gun to pop any bubbles, and then I will put the alcohol inks on it and try to get some movement of color. Okay, I'm going to lightly hit it with the heat gun. There's a spot that was missed right there. Hit it again. Alrighty. And now we just add the alcohol inks. And since you can't put the this on a tumbler, you have to manually pick it up and to get movement, unless you like the splotches the way they are. So I'll just pick it up and just tilt it. And if the colors aren't moving the way you want them to move, You hit it with the heat gun. And as you can see, we got some movement of colors. And make sure you wipe around the edges so you won't have too many drips. I'm going to hit it again with the heat gun so I can get some more movement. Now we can see, hopefully you can see, I have you in camera view, that we have some movement of color. And as I said, wipe around the edges so you won't have too many drip marks. And that's basically it. That's how you do the coaster. You put the epoxy on, you hit it with the heat gun, you add your colors, and then you pick it up and tilt it left to right, up to down, until you get it to the way that you like it. And then you let this sit for 72 hours. I will bring you back when everything is cured, and I will show you how it looks when it's finally done.
This is the finished product, the coaster on the left and the mug on the right.